Stretch saw him running toward the artifact and ordered Eliana to guard it because that was what they aimed for. This was a now or never situation for Raymond, so he aimed his arrow toward the main lead even though his body wasn't in perfect condition. However, at this distance, he was sure he could kill him. Before he could release his arrow at him, he got attacked by Eliana's arrow and was amazed that even on this smoke screen, she could aim at him. The protagonist commands her to run and is amazed as they do not mind sacrificing their teammates for their goal's sake. She rushed toward the artifact and did not want to let them get it, so she activated her skill, Stride, which widened her strides when running to move faster and cross him. She threw her daggers at him, which he blocked with his arm, and this time Stetch crossed him. He instructed Eliana to grab the artifact because they were escaping right after that. Emmerich still was unwilling to let them have it and get away so quickly, so he tried to catch him. The protagonist gets irritated as he can't believe he is still not giving up, even though it is time for them to accept their failure. So he attacked him with his fireball, which burned him. He was screaming from the pain and apologized to his superior ball stock and everyone as he couldn't complete the mission. They grabbed the artifact, after which the dungeon started collapsing, and they escaped from there using the scroll. He wondered who they were and why they were desperate to the point of risking their lives for an artifact. Elian told her to calm down and asked if he remembered what the man with the bow said. According to that, she was sure they had come there looking for the artifact. He was as surprised as they were after that artifact and asked Memento how it looked. Memento was surprised as he was asking him that and wondered if he even had a brain as to how great could something out of a newly formed dungeon be. So he instructed him to give it to him so that he could eat it. Instead of giving artifact to Memento, he wore it, which shocked him, and he wondered what was he doing. He just wanted to try it because of all the artifacts they came across till now. He didn't get a chance to try them out because he absorbed them. The artifacts get linked to him and he is surprised because all the information about them just appeared in his head and its name was Barach. Memento gets furious at him as he is an impudent brat who dares to look at other artifacts while he has him. The actual reason for him being enraged at him was that once an artifact is bound to its user, he wouldn't be able to absorb it, and he asked him if he didn't know that. He was aware of it, but was just being cautious as it might be dangerous if he only relied on him and hoped he would understand it, but he gets furious as this was still an insult to his abilities. The artifact Barach was soon bound to Stetch Atelier. Eliana was surprised to see that he wasn't absorbing the artifact this time. He affirmed that he wanted to try using it, so he picked the stone from the ground, used enchantment, and was amazed. Eliana asked him if that was enchantment, and he affirmed that he thought it would be a waste to absorb it. He wondered if she knew anything about this skill. She explained that it temporarily fills an object with magical energy, and she said he could turn an ordinary dagger into something that rivals a magic tool. From what she had heard, its complexity was second to none, and she asked him how he did that with such ease and assumed that would be better for him. The protagonist gladly told Memento that he was right, and that the stronger he got, the more artifacts he could obtain. He assures him that it doesn't change the fact that he is the best artifact he has, so he should relax. Later, they met a man who was waiting for them, welcomed them, and asked if the two of them were going. The protagonist affirmed and left themselves in his care. Eliana wondered who that man was and if he knew someone he knew. He explained that he was a tour guide. Soon they left. On their way, while looking at the map, he instructed her that if they kept going north from where they were, there was a mountain range called Raksha. One of the biggest mining cities of the continent, Sentigma, was right next to it. That was where they were heading. She stopped on the way and informed him that the city he mentioned was on the other way, but he was headed in that direction because he had to find something first and find it. It was challenging getting into Sentigma because their security was heavy, so they needed another way to get in. He took 2 of the stones from the ground and put them in the box with the money, and she wondered why he was putting that in there. He explained that it was the tool passed from them. They returned to their tour guide, who informed them they were unlucky because fewer people were going in now, and getting in through this route would be more challenging. He opened his cart and instructed them to get in, but it was too small for them to fit in. The man wanted them not to think of it that way as it was considered quite spacious. Eliana was amazed to see that, and for it to be like this, she assumed that those humans had a fascinating culture. The man wanted more equipment, which left Stetch speechless as he already had enough of them. Soon they went, and the guards stopped them and asked what kind of things they were taking in the carriage. The man showed him the list of items he was bringing, including D-rank mining dynamite and equipment. The guards allowed them to go inside after filling out the paperwork. After they reached there, the man informed them to come out as they were there. Eliana was glad that this worked out, but he wanted to get out of there immediately. The man told them that this place was Sentigma because they came through the secret route and they should head to the bar first. They went to the bar, where bar attendant Baltazar was amazed to see him as he was that rumored Stetch about whom he heard from Dalton. He introduced himself and offered him a welcome drink. Usually, he would have welcomed him in, but he came at the worst time. They wondered what he meant by the worst time. Baltazar explained that there had been more monster incidents around the mines these past few days. So all the soldiers there came together to help subjugate the area, and remarked that he wouldn't have gone up to the surface or made a scene if he had had brain cells. He looked at his wanted list picture and laughed as he found his picture funny. The protagonist was exasperated and assured him a bit to worry as he wasn't planning to stay too long either. He asked him when all the black market blacksmiths and alchemists would arrive in the area. Baltazar assumed he didn't fully understand the situation as all the craftsmen around the area were overloaded with hundreds of orders from the equipment needed for the subjugation. There was anyone who would fulfill his order when the military was involved. The protagonist furiously asked him what things he could even get there currently. He wondered what everyone around them was selling, so Baltazar uttered that extorted dynamites and mining equipment. He asked what the blacksmith would prefer, making custom equipment rather than cheaply mass-produced military equipment. But in times like these, they would do what they had to and were doing what they were told to do. The protagonist gets the situation but wonders if he could give more than enough money. Is there someone he could introduce him to? Baltazar was surprised at how stubborn he was and promised to ask around, but didn't want him to get his hopes up. He assumed that someone trying to take advantage of the situation might demand an absurd amount of money. A few days later, he was sadly putting his head on the table and mumbling that he had money, but there was no one to take it. He was crying about what would happen to his adventure and his revenge as there was still no news about any alchemist. Ileana came out wearing his outfit and was glad as these clothes seemed to fit her. Even though human clothes are annoying, she thanked him for them. Baltazar arrived and finally gave him the good news. Although they were swamped, 2 people volunteered to help him. He instructed him to buy them a drink later. The protagonist supposed that they might be a blacksmith and an alchemist to him. The dwarf asked if this was his first time seeing a dwarf and cursed as all the humans thought the dwarves were blacksmiths, so they were racist. He greeted him and introduced himself as an alchemist, Casper, and the lady next to him was a blacksmith, Letty. The protagonist introduced himself and greeted him, and he was aware of him and hoped he would have heard about this already, that the situation there wasn't good. Everyone is flooded with orders, and the soldiers aren't doing any favors for the black market. But someone has to take care of businesses like this to keep the market alive, and if they asked him what he needs, they would decide what to do afterward. He agreed, retrieved his sword, and requested him to look at the sword his friend had specially made for him. They were stunned to know that it was a sword as they hadn't seen anything like that before, and it wasn't something she could tinker with. Later, he thought about getting monster leather and remembered how amazed Letty was after seeing his sword. She didn't know it was possible for equipment to have this much durability while using such intricate pieces. Utilizing the explosive to add to the impact wasn't something an inexperienced blacksmith could have dreamed of. However, with the gas recipe he showed the alchemist, he wouldn't have an easy time getting it no matter where he went. He wanted to give him a recommendation to replace the gas in the cylinder with gunpowder. Compared to the original gas recipe, it would have more firepower, be more accessible to obtain, and be lighter to carry, but still, the price would be high. He was okay with the price and handed him the money. They assured him they would make good use of it, so he shouldn't worry. He also requested him to give him some defensive gear, preferably made of leather. Still, it was difficult for them to make the leather gear at a time like this. He asked Letty if she thought she could do it, and she affirmed as this was much easier than custom gear, but had one condition. She wants him to provide the leather himself, and if he can do that, she is willing to do everything in her power to make him whatever he needs. The protagonist wondered where he could find leather when surrounded by the mines. Baltzar agreed because even the monster nearby is mostly rock type. The protagonist gets started and inquires if the monster he mentioned yesterday was also the stone type. He remembered that according to the condition of the survivors, it did seem like a beast-type monster clawed him. They were devastating to look at, but he couldn't tell him for sure because he didn't see the beast himself. He wondered if he was thinking of going after the monster alone, as it might not be a monster with leather. But he was enthusiastic about going there as they knew about it until he ripped apart the monster. Baltzar reminded him that the only reason they were calling for mercenaries was that the soldiers in this area couldn't subjugate it. The protagonist assured him and wanted him not to worry because he was doing this to make equipment that could save his life and wasn't going to do anything stupid. He wanted everyone to know how leather quality could make or break the equipment. He agreed as he was left with no other choice and instructed him to go and see the guy behind him. He was part of the Sentigma security and a significant source of information to the black market. He should ask him because he was the one who brought the monster news to them. The soldier was sleeping when he went to him and woke him and wanted to buy a drink for him. He was startled and wondered what he wanted from him. The protagonist clarified that he wanted to hear about the monster incident in the mines. He gets pissed off because everyone asked him about that incident and it wasn't something he should be telling anyone. He wondered why it was the only thing people wanted to ask him about. Stetch didn't want to know whatever gossip was floating around and inquired if he was there to witness the moment the miner got attacked. He affirmed that he was the one who must have stood by and watched helpless miners getting ripped to shreds and was the soldier who ran away instead of fighting against it and asked if he had a problem. Baltzar slapped him and uttered that he should indeed have run away because he was their precious connection, so he shouldn't say something so unholy. The soldier told him it was Manticore. The protagonist was shocked as this monster usually appears in the Cadal deserts, but it came out in the Raksha mountains. The soldier rambled about how the large wall broke down when they were digging, and a manticore with a half-ripped wing suddenly popped out of there. It slaughtered the workers before any of them could do anything about it. The protagonist was contented as Manticore was a beast monster with bat wings and a scorpion tail and was perfect for his gear. He thanked him for the information and handed him some money as compensation, and the soldier inquired if he would get him. He affirmed that he needed some monster part. The soldier stopped him because that was not something a ragtag group of adventurers could deal with. It could slice through steel armor like butter and give him his money back as he didn't watch those men die so that he could tell him the story for a couple of coins. The protagonist wants him to take the money as it is okay and assures him that he is more robust than he looks. If not, why would he fight a manticore alone? He wondered what he was talking about as he told him about Manticore, which is almost a dragon-class monster, and remarked that kids these days are full of themselves. The protagonist used the arc and blew out the candle, which amazed them. They asked him if he was a magician and was surprised about what he was counting on. He wasn't a magician, but could at least protect his body. He asked if he had any problem and had a way to sneak into the mines. The soldier agreed to help him. If he did him a favor, he would take care of everything. Later, they reached the mines but couldn't bear the smell because the secret route was through the sewer, and because of this, they managed to avoid all the guards. Memento told him the monster was there, and they saw the entrance full of blood and bones. He couldn't imagine what he did inside after seeing the condition of the entrance and used his animal instinct to find him out. The smell of the rotting flesh was piercing his nostrils, and he cursed it as it was too sensitive, but he had to bear with it. The hardened tracks in the mud were only heading in one direction, and he thought the surrounding area was safe. He was exploring the place when Eliana called him as she saw a severed arm and wondered if that belonged to that soldier's colleague. The soldier requested him to bring back the keepsakes of his dead colleagues and was glad as there was something to take back to him. Eliana keeps the belongings in her bag, and they decide to keep their eyes out for more and keep moving on. The protagonist asked Memento if he had discovered anything about the monster because he had only heard about it and didn't know what they were like. He inquired if he had any weakness or something because that's his specialty, so he assumed he might know. Memento explained that manticores have thick skin, so most weapons won't be able to pierce it, and they were also resistant to magic. It was unfair that it has resistance to physical and magical damage, but it still has a weakness. The underside of the wings is thin, so it's particularly vulnerable to physical attacks, so he keeps that point in mind. They reached the place where they saw more bones and blood, assumed there was much more going on there, and wondered if Manticore did this too. His artifact uttered that there wasn't anything else that could do this around there, and he agreed but wondered why. They heard a growling that startled them. His artifacts explained that it detected him and was waiting for him to enter his territory. It wasn't on the same level as a dragon, but it's still a high-tier monster most humans would never choose to face. Eliana assumed it wouldn't be a problem as her grandma's 8 hours of fear training were worse than this. She remembered her grandma, who instructed her to get up as she hadn't started yet, and they wondered what kind of training that was and what that elf even did. She was right, as he was facing off against an entire kingdom, so he didn't want to go pussy out of there. Memento agreed that even if a limb or two rips off, he would pop them right back, and this enraged him as he was treating him like a doll. He assured her not to worry because dying there was not part of his plan, and she asked him if he had any plans. According to the rumors, it doesn't seem to be something he could take lightly while making a trap using steel wire. He was aware that it may not seem like much, but this wire was made of steel, so it should be able to hinder its movement at least. He decided to go in first and lure it out, so he instructed her to stay outside and support him from a distance. She got everything he instructed and told him to be careful. He was ready to greet the little guy, used the enchantment on his dagger to amplify its power, and went inside. He went inside and searched for the monster around, but instead of the monster, he found his egg. They were stunned as a manticore must be at least 50 years old to lay an egg, so it was rare to see something like that. The protagonist assumed he wouldn't have to worry about the money for a while if he could get his hands on this and was getting addicted to his job. The protagonist gets nostalgic about seeing the egg and dreams of getting it, but the monster takes advantage of this situation and attacks from above. The protagonist is stunned, but his automatic reflex helps him evade the attack and he rushes back. Its scorpion-like tail was attacking him from behind, but his artifacts knew him, so he dodged it and attacked it using his dagger. He was amazed as the acid came out of its tail and realized it used its egg as bait to lure them out. Memento explained that the manticore eggs are extremely tough, so it might have figured out that they wouldn't be able to harm it one way or another, and he was growling at him. The protagonist was a bit worried as it had a poisonous tail, acid attacks, and jaws and claws, so he was at a disadvantage trying to take it all simultaneously. So he had no choice but to run away and lure it out. It tried to attack him with his claw as he rushed out, but he attacked him using the fireball and arc simultaneously. He was surprised as he saw his tail appearing from that fire and threw out poisonous stinging at him, which he managed to dodge as his artifact guided him. Memento told him it was all right because magical attacks are more effective than physical ones, so he should keep going, as he couldn't ignore the damage forever. It shot its stings toward him, but he evaded each time. His artifact instructed Bim not to let it touch anything that was not enchanted, so he should be careful. He instructed Eliana to shoot an arrow at the monster, but its skin was so tough that it didn't pierce it. She was amazed to see that its outer skin wasn't a joke, but still, she attacked it multiple times. After some time, the protagonist instructed her to stop and get out of the way, due to which the monster got trapped inside the wire trap and used a fireball on him. He instructed her to keep shooting at Manticore while he was using a combination of arc and fireball at him. Still, soon it roared and broke the trap. The protagonist decided to take him on from the front and instructed her to keep at a distance, and she affirmed, so he rushed at him. He went up close to him as this was his only chance and reached right beneath where the wing started because that was the location where he has to aim. He attacked at that location, and the monster roared and hit him with his head to throw him away. He gets injured and coughs out blood, which worries Eliana, but he assures her not to worry because he is still alive. His recovery is initiated, but his artifact wants him not to rely too much on recovery because that skill doesn't heal but restores. If his organs got punctured and started bleeding from inside, then there wasn't much that he could do about it. But he didn't care much as he was good, and it was all worth it. He wanted him to look at his wing pit as he got a good dig at it, so he has to aim for that. Memento wants him to attack it better because he lost his only weapon. The protagonist was aware that if there are high risks, there are high rewards, as this wasn't the first time the odds had been stacked against him. So he was sure that he could defeat it and attacked the manticore using an arc, which electrocuted it, and was glad because it was working. The electricity traveled straight through the sword into its body, so his artifact was pleased because he was doing real damage. Manticore was holding against his arc, which worried him even though he knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. The longer this dragged on, the worse it was for him, so he required it to die. The monster drawled, which produced unbearable noise for them, taking advantage of this situation. It shoots sting at him, but he simultaneously evades the attack using crosswind and airburst. This attack spread acid everywhere, so he again used crosswind, and the monster lunged at him to attack, but Eliana attacked at T with an arrow, and the protagonist jumped back to evade it. Manticore turned and looked at her and shot her using his sting. She was concerned because she didn't have many arrows left, so if they didn't finish soon, they would be doomed. The protagonist sees this, so he rushes at her and takes her away. He manages to dodge it and is irritated by its tail. He instructed her to lay low and cover him as she was just lucky now because he saw her getting attacked, and she affirmed. The protagonist was troubled as it should still be taking damage, so why doesn't it seem to be affected? Memento assured him to trust him because the attack indeed worked at it, so he needed one more good hit to subjugate it. The protagonist wished he could bring the penetrator with him to pierce a hole in its body easily. Memento wanted him to forget what-ifs because he should focus on the situation before him. The protagonist decided to attack again, lifted his hand, and wanted to see if he could withstand this. He electrocuted it using his ability arc, but was shocked as soon Manticore got rid of the current, but soon fell. The protagonist was glad because it worked, so this was his chance to attack, and as he dashed to attack him, the monster glanced at him and attacked him from behind using his tail. Memento informed him about the sting, but Eliana soon attacked it with her arrow because she had his back. The artifact praised him, although he knew she couldn't hear him. The protagonist found the shovel and knew that anything could be used as a weapon if he tried hard enough. He grabbed its wing and attacked at the joint where he had already attached with his dagger, and enormous blood spurted out. He completely separated its wing using the shovel as it belonged to him now, and it roared, which forced him to cover his ears, but he didn't want to give up as he wasn't done yet. So he attacked it again, and then, using the fireball, he assaulted its damaged point. Soon, there was an explosion, and his body was burnt from that end. The protagonist was out of the mana in the process and hurt his arm. Eliana rushed at him, wondering if he was all right, but he was glad as he was at least still alive. She handed him a potion and instructed him to spread this on his wound and drink the rest. Memento was impressed by his performance as the last part was awe-inspiring. Eliana was also stunned as she couldn't believe he beat a manticore by himself. The protagonist inquired if they won and if the manticore was finally dead, and she affirmed even though it was still hard to believe. He was pleased, so he decided to skin it first so they could leave the location, but he was startled as he looked at its inside. Elena and Memento wondered what was wrong, and he replied that there was nothing inside, even the body of the people it devoured. Memento also found it strange, considering how many people it must have eaten. It was impossible for its stomach to be so empty. There were traces of bodies all over the dungeon, and yet his stomach was empty, and all that was left was the egg. They were stuck at the egg, and soon the manticore's tail reached near his eye, but she attacked him. Thus, he can evade the attack to some extent, but still gets injured. He alerted Eliana because the tail was near her and swirled around her neck, so he punched it and used an air burst at it so she got out of its grasp. Stetch was concerned as he was careless, as he should have considered the possibility that there might be two of them since there was an egg. He saw the female manticore, who was even bigger and more robust than the male. She rushed at him and threw him back toward his sting, which pierced his chest and caused massive bleeding. Eliana was worried, but he told her to stay back as it was dangerous, and remembered that it was the manticore the guy was talking about with the torn wings from the story in the pub. The protagonist attacked it using a fireball, but the monster attacked and threw him back. Memento instructed him to get up because if he passed out now, he was screwed, He told him the recovery only kept him standing, but it didn't heal him, and its acid was too strong for his body to withstand. Eliana covered him and wanted him to get a hold of himself, otherwise they would be dead. He wasn't worried about himself as he was fine, but it was too dangerous for her, so he suggested retreating for now and finding a way to kill it. Helena was startled as the monster abruptly attacked her. The protagonist was worried about her and coughed out blood. Memento suggested that he should at least drink the potion to neutralize the effect of acid, so he drank it and threw the bottle away. It shattered, and he wondered what had happened to Eliana. Memento uttered that she wasn't dead yet, but if he didn't beat that monster soon, they would die. He was aware that they would all die, and he didn't even have any other choice but to beat it. The female manticore aimed his tail at him and shot the poisonous sting, but he made it using the crosswind. Memento instructed him to focus on attacking, and he would block all of those projectiles, and he used enchantment on his dagger. He rushed at it to attack because it was still a living organism, no matter its size, which meant its sensory organs were its weak point. He jumped and used air to burst at its tail, which made it cry out of intense pain. Taking advantage of this situation, he attacked its wing and tore it down. It roared and was looking at him, but he wasn't done yet, so he kicked his face and pierced its eye with his sword. The female manticore glared at him and chomped his body, which started shimmering as the recovery initiated. The protagonist smirked as the monster roared, and he was thrown away, and his torn skin regenerated again. He lay down and asked the monster what was wrong with him, as it had been so confident just a minute ago. But he looked so scared now and wondered if it was all bark but no bite. Eliana woke up and rubbed her eyes, and he inquired if she could stand. She wondered if she passed out. What happened to Manticore? She was startled to see the monster and asked what was happening because the Manticore feared him. The protagonist approached and instructed her to follow him as their prey remained alive. Memento was furious and didn't waste time making fun, as he should remember that he was almost out of mana and had one more shot. But that one shot was enough for him because that monster didn't last much longer either. He handed her an enchanted glowing dagger and wanted her to help him. He used arc to attack it, and was sure that with that sword stuck in its eye, the damage should go straight to its brain, and his technique worked as soon the monster fell. So he hurriedly attacked its other eyes using the shovel and instructed Eliana to cut off its tail. She obeyed his command and immediately cut its tail. The protagonist lifted the incised portion of its tail and thought that if it were the ultimate predator in this dungeon, he would pierce it with the ultimate weapon and slam at its neck. It died, which made them glad as they finally succeeded in defeating both the manticore. Later at the bar, the people whispered after looking at him about what he was carrying and who that guy was. Balthazar was shocked to see them and wondered if it was a real manticore from the Raksha mountain and if all those were its body parts. They put down all the luggage containing the monster parts, and Balthazar was amazed, inquiring if he meant to tell him that he had defeated the monster. The protagonist wiped his face and affirmed and explained that there was a male and female hunting together, and he thought the female carrying the egg needed a temporary place to stay because she hurt her wing. It was new for Balthazar to hear about the egg, so Stetch showed him that egg and explained that it was also his first time seeing it. He was giving him compensation for the information, but he refused and told him to keep it, which shocked him. Balthazar laughed, seeing this would be enough for him and give him something to talk about for a year. Other people were checking the material, but the dwarf stopped him from staying away, and they thought he was so unfair. He went toward the soldier who gave him the information and handed him a bag that he had specially brought for him. The soldier was shocked as he saw his fellow soldiers' belongings. The protagonist apologized to him because most of them barely had anything left on them, so he tried to bring back as much as he could. But the soldier assured him that he did not need to be sorry. Instead, he should be thankful to him for these things. At least now he had something to give to the families when he tells what happened to them. He appreciated his effort because it relieved him and apologized for troubling him. At night, some of the alchemists arrived at the bar and heard they could see a manticore egg there. They were amazed that this was a rare sight because they had only heard about the manticore egg. Blacksmith Letty was also astonished to check out the skin of the manticore as it was so tough and sturdy. Balthazar told them that he didn't mind them all looking around, but he didn't want them to dare go around and tell anyone about this. He warned them that if any of them caused trouble for him because of this, then he swore in the name of Astan, the god of the underworld, that he would hunt them down to the depths of hell if he had to. The protagonist laughed as he had good customer service, and his mind was at ease after it. He wanted to ask him something as he was surprised that he didn't get paid more for the 2 manticores. Letty doesn't know what he did to kill them, but their hides were pretty severely damaged. She knew that's the least of his worries when fighting a manticore because it's even like a miracle that he made it back alive. The protagonist agreed with her because if he had been worried about the hide while fighting, he would have died in a heartbeat. Casper informed him that the sack on the table was the money left over from upgrading his weapon. Stetch was amazed to see so much money left. The blacksmith said that she had his sword at the workshop, so it should be ready by the next day, but the armor would take about 3 days to make even if she started now. The protagonist is shocked to know it because, from what he knew, it takes a lot longer than that to cure and tans monster hides. Letty clarified that this only happens when the blacksmith is an amateur and doesn't want him to underestimate Sentigma's craftsmanship. Eliana arrived and had a problem. She asked her if there was a chance that she could repair the bows as well. Letty refused, and the protagonist guessed it was too severely damaged to improve, so she had to make a new one. But this was the bow made using the elvish technique, so she wondered if she could make something of the same quality. Stetch apologized to her because it was his fault that her arrows were severely damaged while protecting him. She didn't have much of a problem, but was sad as this was an old bow that her grandfather had given her, and she knew it would be bound sooner or later. Memento appeared and agreed with her. Stetch covered his ear as he got terrified by his sudden appearance and was aware that she subtly emphasized the word grandfather just now. The protagonist suggests they go the next day to see the blacksmith, and they will get an even better bow for her. She sadly thanked him, and he was stunned as her ear drooped and wondered what that meant. She turned, and he wished her a good night memento and inquired if he thought they would have anything like that with elvish technique. He was so pissed off that he wanted him to keep his mouth close as he was thinking of a way to help her. Meanwhile, at the northern front of Benizia, Prince Gerald instructed the soldiers to rebuild the defensive wall as quickly as possible as they had to prepare for the next wave of monsters, and they affirmed. He was concerned because the monsters kept coming from every direction but weren't getting the needed supplies and reinforcement. Nothing was going according to his plan, and his soldier appeared and informed him that the castle bandit had contacted them. But he was in the mood for more nonsense or excuses, so he should tell them he was busy. The soldier informed him that it was different this time, which made him anxious, and he wondered who it was. Balstock asked the prince how he had been, which made him glad as he called at the right time because he asked if something had gone missing. He was a bit anxious and informed the prince of a problem. He wondered if he recalled that he had sent out a task force to retrieve the artifact in that new dungeon a few weeks ago. The prince grabbed his head and guessed they might have returned empty-handed. But the situation was worse than that. Balstock put together a search team to go and look for them, and they said that the dungeon was already in ruins. The prince gets worried because this means that someone already has the artifact and wonders if his royal guards betrayed him. But that wasn't the case because all the royal guards were chosen from orphans with nowhere to go. If they attempted to betray the royal family, the magic blood oath they had sworn would kill them. Naturally, there has never been a single traitor so far. The prince knew that he trusted his guards, so he didn't doubt their loyalty, but this wasn't anything about an artifact, as his dignity was at stake there. He didn't know what his brother Alfred would do if he found out about it, so he instructed him to find them as soon as possible. On the other hand, while having breakfast, the protagonist asks the bar attendant about the number of weapon shops around. Balthazar inquired if he was looking for a new bow for that young lady with him. Stetch asked for his opinion that he could find one, but wasn't sure about it. He was certain they could find a bow there, but replacing the one she had wouldn't be easy. It sounds like it held much sentimental value to her. Elves also hate everything from the dungeon, so she probably won't like the weapons they make around there. After finishing his breakfast, he rushed out while wiping his face as if he were going to find a bow for her, even if he had to check every pawn shop and weapon shop in the city. Balthazar apologized for telling him he was late because his girlfriend had already returned to the ground level. He was shocked and wondered when she left, so he replied that she had woken up before him and asked him how to get out of there. He was sure that she would be fine, but there were a lot of suspicious characters around there, so if he was worried, he suggested he should go after her. He threw the napkin at him, wondered why he didn't stop her from going, and clarified that she wasn't his girlfriend. Balthazar remarked that she seemed more observant than him, and guys are always the last ones to figure out this stuff. Later, he reached the market and wondered where she wandered off to. He remembered that he never explained the value of money around there to Eliana. He hoped she wouldn't get ripped off, but Memento suggested he shouldn't worry about her because she was more careful than him. He heard someone suggesting to a girl that he knew an excellent pub there, so he wanted her to drink with him, and he turned to look at them. He recognized Eliana with some stranger who suggested she give up on the weapon shop as they knew about a better place. Memento inquired if he was not going to go after her, and he hid behind to follow them secretly and wondered if she would be all right because there were 3 guys. He was startled as he heard the chopping sound, wondered what that was, and laughed as he should have guessed there would be trouble. His artifact knew those 3 didn't stand a chance, so he appeared from behind, and the man wondered who he was. The protagonist wanted them to ignore him and not worry about him. The man furiously rushed at him with his dagger, inquiring what he wanted and if he was there to watch the show. Before the man could attack him, he punched him first, so he fell and beat him vigorously, which terrified his companion, who was hesitant to attack. Eliana asked him what he was looking at and forcefully kicked him from behind, which slammed him to the wall. The protagonist inquired if she was all right, but she was doubtful if he was seriously worried about her. He remembered that he also couldn't beat those humans in his previous fight, so he was trying to work on his weakness. He knew those humans he met in the dungeon were well trained. Forgetting this, he wanted to go somewhere else safe. On their way, Eliana wondered what he was doing there, but he also wanted to ask her the same question. His intentions were evident as he came there looking for her and asked why she arrived so early in the morning. She uttered that the elves believe that old, valuable objects contain the spirit of new life or that of their ancestor. So before the sun had risen, she gave her grandfather Bo a proper funeral. He could feel her emphasis on that word piercing his body sharply, so he groaned with pain. Memento was astonished as that elf may be much cleverer than he thought because she was trying to make him feel guilty. The protagonist was glad as it took a while to guess this. She was mumbling about how to burn the bows, although finding somewhere secluded enough was challenging. Afterwards, she looked for a new bow in the shop around there instead of returning to the inn. This shocked him because when he asked around, they all said one had stopped by their stores. She explained that she feared people might discover she was an elf if she went into the shops and talked to the owner. So to be on the safe side, she just looked into the shops from outside. But she couldn't see anything that she liked and was thinking of heading back when those men approached her suddenly. The protagonist figured out what happened and asked for some time as he was sure he could find her a bow she would like as promised. Memento laughed, thinking he might be kidding, and wondered where he would find something to replace a bow that meant so much to her. The protagonist instructed him to stay out of it, but his artifact warned him not to copy him as that was his line. Stetch looked at her and called her to check out one of the shops he found, and they went inside the shop. He guessed because it was a mining town, there were all kinds of rare items available there, and he inquired if anyone was there. Eliana could find bows that were placed at the side. The protagonist was glad she found the bow she liked, which looked much more sturdy. She sighed because the wood they used was all wrong, as the grain of the wood they used for the bow core was practically crying out in pain. He was amazed and asked his artifact if he could hear that, and he was aware that he would never go to find a bow for her. The protagonist assures Memento that there would be more bows in other cities too, so he shouldn't worry about it. The shop owner came out and apologized to them as he was hammering something and inquired if they were looking for something particular. Memento requested him to stop for a while, so he asked for a minute from the owner. His artifact uttered that although there was a lot of random junk, he bet some hidden gems would be inside. The protagonist needs clarification about knowing that he sees things differently from the humans, so he asks his artifact what he sees. He was holding something that might be perfect for Eliana, but he wondered what that thing was. Later, she looked at the weapon he gave her, and the protagonist was glad as she found a weapon she liked. The protagonist is astonished, as it's an impressive idea that they could use his mana to create the type of weapon they are most comfortable with. Memento proudly uttered that his skills were more special than that item. Ileana expressed her gratitude to him and named it Recordatio, which stunned him as she already named it. The protagonist was uncomfortable since he had put these cursed things on in the shop. His body started feeling strange and heavier. He tried to pick items that wouldn't attract attention, but Memento felt great absorbing the sweet smell of the dark energy and death. So he started to look like someone worthy of being called his partner, but he didn't like this at all. Ileana wondered when they were leaving, and he explained that Letty told him his gear was ready so they could go as soon as they picked them up. Later, they were at the dungeon where he was killing the goblin and was alarmed to see a goblin chief and assured that they should be getting close to Jelen by now. They assumed that whoever owned this land hadn't been guarding it well, and he instructed Ileana to deal with others as he would deal with the big one. She affirmed and aimed her arrow at the goblin's eyes. The one next to him roared. The goblin rushed and stabbed the protagonist, who was amazed at how this worked. He was glad the manticore leather was doing its job, and he was completely fine because of this. He wondered if he should call it armor. Since he took his chance, it was Stetch's turn, so he stared at it and smirked. His body started glimmering, and it roared soon, and all of them were dead. The protagonist was contented because it was easy for him to subjugate them. Ileana inquired if their objective at this next place they were heading was to teach the corrupt village lord a lesson. He affirmed that he planned to help the townspeople and cut off one of the royal family's precious sources of income, and he heard something quite interesting from his friend Dalton. Dalton inquired if he had some lord named Borden who started raising tons of cash, and he remembered that he was the lord of Jelen and wondered why he was suddenly talking about it. He heard rumors that he was using the funds to buy up as many artifacts as possible, and they were all being kept somewhere in Jelen. Finally, they reached the village, saw it from above the cliff, and decided to find a place to stay. They entered the village where a soldier was taking the pig from the soldier, and he was requesting to let it go because if he took it, then his family would have nothing left. The soldier scolded him and ordered him to shut up as everything they own belongs to the Lord, so he should quit whining and hand over the pig. Ileana furiously glared at him and wanted to take the initiative to help that poor man, but Stetch stopped him. This was clear to them, and she was aware that was not right, so she wanted to do something. Still, he instructed her to wait for now, as they should assess the situation before getting involved. They snatched the pig from them forcefully and left. The man started crying, so the protagonist approached him, took out coin from his bag, and gave it to him. He inquired if they were looking for a place to stay, so did he mind if they rent a room there. They made the delicious dish for them, although they were refused as they didn't need to do this all for them. But this was the least they could do because they wouldn't feel right if they didn't care for their guests. The man explained that those people had exploited them for several years. At first, it was just a tiny increase in cost to use facilities like the water wheel, and then they started coming up with all these ridiculous penalties and tolls. The man sighed because they had to tolerate this because they had nowhere else to go, so all they could do was lie down or live in hiding. Making money isn't easy for them, so buying their freedom isn't an option either. It sounds to Stetch like they have it worse than he did. Even though he was an orphan, this makes no sense to him. Ileana wondered why those soldiers were stealing from the farmers, because if they had collected that much money, they shouldn't have had any problem paying the soldiers their wages. The man explained it wasn't so bad until they started charging all these taxes, but even the soldiers' wages were reduced for some reason. The protagonist thinks it's probably because the town lord spends all that money on something else. He was strategizing how he should approach this and pondered if he had gathered that much money, he must be hiding it somewhere most people wouldn't know about. The protagonist was alarmed and inquired how he knew much about the soldiers. The man explained that he often hears soldiers talking at the town pub. The protagonist smirked as this made sense because all vital information usually makes its way to a bar eventually, so he excused for a bit. Later, the soldiers were amazed at the bar as he was pretty intense, and they hadn't seen him around there. He seemed quite challenging, so they inquired where he worked as he couldn't believe he had beaten him in an arm wrestle. The protagonist laughed and replied that he worked here and there as a mercenary because he did all right for himself. The soldier was amazed to know about the mercenary as he knew there was something different about him. They only see a few people with his kind of spirit in these parts and inquire if he could buy him a drink. The protagonist agreed, as he would appreciate his effort as he could use a drink after those monsters today. The soldier was shocked, as there weren't any monsters that strong around there. Stetch uttered that he thought there might be just a few goblins or something sound in the town, but he ran into a chieftain. The soldier was not surprised to learn about the appearance of chieftain, as they saw them often, and inquired if he had beaten it. The protagonist replied that he barely managed to escape with his life, as there was no chance for him to win it. So he was hoping that they could give him some advice, because they were pros in this field. The soldier laughed and remarked that he had much to learn as a mercenary. He would be in big trouble if he couldn't even take out one little goblin. He explained that when he was his age, all they had to do was hand him a spear, and he could easily subjugate them with a single blow. Later, they were drunk and uttered that he could easily beat a chieftain if he had the right gear. The soldier furiously slammed the table and uttered that all that money in this land gets wasted on buying those artifacts. He wondered why their lord did not use the money to pay their wages first, and the protagonist was astonished as he started to get drunk, so it was time to throw the bait. He showed that he was surprised to know that their lord was so wealthy, which sounded like a good opportunity. The protagonist confessed that he had an artifact, showed them his enchantment artifact, and asked if they thought he would pay a lot for it. He sighed and wondered if they were really honest or just stupid, because their reaction clarified what they were thinking. The soldier assured him not to worry, because he had seen how the lord spent, as he would buy the artifact even if it were covered in shit. He instructed him to head over to the castle if he was interested in selling it to see Lord Chelsea, the head of the night, as he generally handles that kind of business. He came out of the bar drunk, and Eliana was waiting for him. As she saw him, she inquired if he got the information he wanted. The protagonist apologized, as he thought he could slip away, but it became a big drinking party. While leaving, he stretched his arms and was amazed those soldiers could drink. Eliana couldn't understand how those humans could stomach that bitter liquid. After some time, she whispered as if they were being followed. The protagonist thought the same way, as they were so obvious, and he could hear them from a mile away. He gets the stone, enchanting it using his artifact and their wit at them, and he commands them to show themselves who they are. So many strange men appeared from their hiding and lifted their swords, and the group leader decided to keep this brief, as he wanted him to hand over the artifact and get out of there. Before he could even complete his sentence, Elena attacked him and threw him away, which stunned them. The protagonist was speechless, as he didn't even let him finish his sentence, although he was about to attack them too. Sometimes he wondered how on earth he managed to beat Eliana in the dark forest. Memento remarked that she reminds him more and more of him, and he hit her in the past because of his help. He wondered if he thought he could have beaten him in a long, drawn-out battle. The protagonist gets what he means, but currently he wants to hurry there and help her. This was more or less what he was expecting. He inquired what they were after, and the soldier uttered that they wanted his artifact. The protagonist slammed at his face and threw him away, because that wasn't what he wanted to know. They assembled within minutes of him leaving the pub, and they had those black uniforms ready, so he assumed they might have been planning this from the start. But if they asked him, he seriously doubted that many amateurs like them could have devised a plan like this. Stetch grabbed the soldier's index finger and uttered that he would do something, but he was a nice person, so he wanted to give him a chance first. He warned him to tell him what he wanted to know while feeling generous and firmly grasping his finger. He assured him that if he didn't say to him, starting the next day, he wouldn't be eating with hand, so he uttered Lord Chelsea's name. This shocked him. The soldier explained that Lord Chelsea made them do this because Count Borden had been spending too much on artifacts. So, the Knight's Lord Chelsea told them to rob anyone who brought artifacts into his land. The protagonist was amazed, as they were not a very bright bunch, and wondered if it hadn't occurred to them to take the artifact for themselves. He asked where those artifacts were kept and warned them to tell everything they knew. But the soldier behind him uttered that they don't know everything either, but Lord Chelsea is susceptible to information leaking, so he never says a word around ordinary soldiers, which was why nothing was left to take from them. The protagonist thinks for a while and utters that if they don't know anything, he guessed there was no reason for him to let them go. One of the soldiers, out of fear, uttered that there was something suspicious, that there was a well near the military base where Count Boren lives. Although it isn't also being used, he has seen them pouring tons of meat into it. the protagonist wonders what he eats and if he expects to go there and swift through a bunch of rotting meat. He assumed he wanted to mislead him with useless information, but this wasn't useless. The soldier explained that the meat they threw in the well was fresh, and sometimes they even caught wild animals and threw them down there. The protagonist wondered how they would dump food down a well near the Count's residence. He was stunned as he figured out that they were using a monster to guard the artifact. This was what these sneaky people liked to do. Meanwhile, in the castle, the Lord of Jelen Borden permits the person knocking at the door to enter the room. Chelsea appeared, so he assumed he must be tired from patrolling the grounds so quickly, but he wasn't that tired. He wondered if he still hadn't heard back from the first Prince Raptors, but he wasn't that hurried. He was assured because the prince said they would be perfect for his artifact collection and seemed enthusiastic about them. The prince was especially interested in the first artifact, and in his letter he emphasized how much he was looking forward to seeing it. He wanted him to pay better as that artifact alone was worth far more than the other two combined. Now, all he had to do was deliver the goods to him in the capital in a few days. Then they would be set for life. Borden instructed him to stay on guard and ensure no unexpected hitches, and he affirmed. Conversely, the protagonist and Eliana decided to act that night, because if Chelsea were as thorough as they say, he would have noticed his missing men by now. So they have to break into that underground vault by the end of the present day, but Elena wondered if he was thinking of getting in, and if they were going down into the well. The protagonist was aware that if he was that protective of his artifacts, he bet there would be a lot of defensive traps in place. He wasn't sure what was down there in the well, but for now, that was probably their quickest and safest way to get to the vault. Ileana agreed as he was right about the traps, but because they didn't even know what to expect down, she wondered how they would know what to prepare now and which gear to bring. The protagonist was making a potion, and was aware that,